Hello, everyone, and welcome to our evening event. At least it's evening here in Los Angeles. My name is Professor Ann Karagosian, and it is my privilege as the director of the Promise Armenian Institute at UCLA to welcome you to our Zoom-based webinar lecture and discussion. This event is a special one. It is being held today in celebration of International Women's Day, March 8, 2022. Our event this evening focuses on an extraordinary, though relatively unknown and certainly unappreciated heroine during and after the Armenian Genocide, Diana Apcar. Diana Apcar served as the Honorary Consul to Japan of the short-lived First Republic of Armenia, which existed between 1918 and 1920. And she saved countless Armenian lives after the genocide as these individuals escaped from their ancestral homeland through Japan. Our event celebrates not only Diana Apcar's life, but her remarkable work as documented in a film called The Stateless Diplomat, written and produced by a gifted filmmaker who happens to be Diana Apcar's great-granddaughter, Mimi Malayan, from whom we will hear during the evening, and where you as the audience have had and will continue to have an opportunity to view the film via Vimeo. We will also hear this evening a lecture by an outstanding scholar from Tohoku University in Sendai, Japan, Dr. Meline Mesropyan, who has spent many years researching Diana Apcar's role in coordinating with the Japanese government in processing Armenian refugees during World War I. So we warmly welcome Mimi and Meline to our event and look forward to hearing from both of you. I am grateful to Dr. Melissa Bilal, a UCLA scholar in ethnomusicology and the Associate Director of the UCLA Armenian Music Program, for coordinating this lecture and discussion for us today. I would also like to acknowledge the co-sponsorship of this event by the UCLA Terasaki Center for Japanese Studies and the UCLA Center for the Study of Women. Thanks to both of our partners for their contributions to this event. And I would like to offer a special welcome to our viewers from Japan and also from Armenia. I know you will enjoy and learn from the life of this person who has been so important to both of our cultures. Dr. Bilal will provide formal introductions for our two speakers in a moment. But let me note that for those of you watching live via the Zoom webinar platform, you have an opportunity to send questions to us by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom portion of your screen and typing in the question. Please be sure to be as specific and succinct as possible in your question, and we will direct as many of the questions as are practical to our speakers at the end of the lecture and discussion. Please also note that this event is being recorded for future viewing at our Promise Armenian Institute website and YouTube channel. And in the unlikely event that this Zoom webinar drops for any reason, please just connect right back to the same link, as it will put you back into our Zoom session. And now it gives me great pleasure to turn the event over to the coordinator of this film and discussion, Dr. Melissa Bilal. Dr. Bilal is the Associate Director of the UCLA Armenian Music Program and a lecturer in the Department of Ethnomusicology at UCLA. Dr. Bilal was previously a Distinguished Research Fellow at the UCLA Center for Near Eastern Studies, and prior to her arrival at UCLA, she was an assistant professor in the School of Humanities and Social Sciences at the American University of Armenia, where she continues to contribute to the development of a gender studies minor program. Dr. Bilal studied sociology, receiving her BA and MA degrees at Boğaziçi University in Istanbul, and she received her Ph.D. in ethnomusicology from the University of Chicago. She has taught at the University of Chicago's Departments of Music and Near Eastern Languages and Civilizations, Wasatch's University's History Department, and at the Middle Eastern, South Asian, and African Studies Department at Columbia University. So Melissa John, I will now turn the webinar over to you.
Thank you very much. And I'm especially happy that this year, as the Promise Institute, we got the chance to celebrate International Women's Day, which I think is now traditional. As the Promise Institute of Armenian Studies, we have been celebrating and honoring the International Women's Day. And this year, we are especially happy because we are remembering and honoring Diana Apcar and hosting Mimi Malayan and Meline Mesropyan to talk about her life and work. I use Stateless Diplomat in my teaching, and I'm really looking forward to our discussion tonight. Without further ado, let me introduce Mimi Malayan. Mimi Malayan has practiced landscape architecture in San Francisco Bay Area for 20 years, focusing her professional career on urban parks, plazas, and playground design. While she is mostly retired, she continues to teach at the Academy of Art University. In 2002, while cleaning her uncle's apartment, Mimi discovered a box of papers and books by Diana Apcar. This was the seed that unraveled another interest, uncovering her great-grandmother's life story. The more she investigated, the more awestruck she became. The result of this work is the film, The Stateless Diplomat, which was released in November 2018. And since then, Mimi has shown the film at several film festivals, and it has won several awards, including Armin Wegner Humanitarian Award at ARPA International Film Festival in 2019, Best Biographical Film at New Hope Film Festival in July 2019, and Audience Choice for Best Documentary at Pomegranate Film Festival in November 2018. We will show a short trailer of the movie, and then I will pass the mic to Mimi.
I know I must do something to save them from more violence.
The Armenians, they were stateless. They had no one really to protect their interests.
Our poor people are driven into deserts. Sick, aged children, women are falling on the roadsides and dying. Have you forgotten poor Armenia?
Her main concern was to find some refuge for these people, and she did this single-handedly.
The Turks were getting organized for another attack. I made it my business to free myself from this hell.
In every Armenian family we have stories about genocide and about what we call it pakepach, which means run away or run.
All these people came with their horror stories of what they had gone through, how much they have lost.
Diana Apcar helped refugees with logistics, food, place to stay. She was a woman in a man's world, and she was making things happen.
They are desperate to go home, but cannot. They have no homeland, and so they go in search of a new one. I will assist them. I will be their surety. Their expenses will be incurred by me.
Other women just simply didn't do these sort of things.
The little mother of a nation, that was her nickname. She managed to help as many refugees as she could to move to the United States.
Her entire work, entire life actually, was a true diplomat and true humanitarian.
Aparov ձեռքերում եք, Yes, Keprakem says,
we tend to forget the power of the individual. The power of the individual is a remarkable phenomenon.
Yes, Mimi.
Great. Well, thank you. First, I'd like to express my deepest thanks to Anne Karagosian, Melissa Bilal, Hasmik Bagdasarian, and the UCLA Promise Armenian Institute for coordinating and promoting this event. I'm very happy to share my film with you and thrilled to talk about one of my favorite subjects, Diana Apcar. First slide, please. The early years. Expectations for Diana Apcar, née Guyane, born on October 17, 1859 in Rangoon, British India, were simple. She would marry and become a mother. But from a very early on, Diana quietly challenged societal norms for a young woman of the Victorian era. She was an avid reader, insisted on learning Armenian, having grown up speaking English, wanted an education, and loved writing. Next slide, please. Her first novel, Susan, assumed in large part to be autobiographical, provides insight into 19th century life for a young Indian-born Armenian woman and the struggle to find one's path. Next, please. At a young age, Diana's family moved to Calcutta, where the Armenian community flourished. But young Diana was not satisfied with her privilege. She was disturbed by injustice in the world and searched for meaning in her life. She attended convent school and knew the Bible and its messages thoroughly. Next, please. The marriage. There is no question that Diana was pressured to marry as a young woman and that she resisted her mother's wish in order to focus on her writing. However, given her mother's early death in 1882, I believe that marriage offered Diana more independence than the life of an old maid under a sibling's roof. Next, please. On June 12, 1889, Diana Apcar and Apkar Michael Apkar married at St. John the Baptist Armenian Apostolic Church in Rangoon. A year later, their first child, Rose, was born. And before the end of 1890, the trio moved to Japan. Next, please. Japan had been closed to the world for hundreds of years. However, the Meiji era transformed Japan from isolation to a westernized society. Modern industry was being developed, and with it, the need for trade. Foreigners were encouraged to participate in Japan's modernization. Additionally, Michael's cousins and distant relatives had long been involved in trade, from Bombay to Singapore to Hong Kong, establishing Apkar and Company and the Apkar line. The young entrepreneur, Michael Apkar, following a family tradition, seized the opportunity to move to Japan. Next, please. Over 7 years, from 1890 to 1897, Diana gave birth to 5 children: Rose, Michael, John Apcar, Ruth, and John Apkar. Both sons, named John, died, leaving her with 2 girls and 1 boy. The pain of her sons' deaths is expressed in Diana's second book, Home Stories of the War. Next, please. It's a collection of 7 short stories about the Russo-Japanese War, published in 1905 and dedicated to the Japanese people. Diana admired the Japanese, their courage, sense of patriotism, and willingness to sacrifice. Next, please. These were virtues that Diana possessed and which she attributed to both the Japanese and Armenian peoples. In November 1906, after 17 years of marriage, her husband suddenly died. Next, please. She had experienced many difficulties during that marriage, relocating away from her family to a foreign land, losing 2 children, and undergoing 2 bankruptcies. But this was the biggest blow. Michael had been on a business trip to Kobe when a frightened horse kicked him in the head. After recovering from the initial blow, he suddenly died 2 days later, most likely from an aneurysm. Next, please. The business. Michael's death pushed Diana into a new role, that of businesswoman. In 1906, the business had not been faring well, and funds were limited, forcing Diana's son, Michael, just 15 years old, to drop out of school, as the family could not afford the tuition to St. Joseph's College. Diana took charge of A.M. Apkar and Company, importers and exporters, with her son as her assistant. Within a few years, Diana succeeded in stabilizing the business, allowing her to pass on more responsibilities to her son. In time, the business became quite successful and afforded Diana and the subsequent generation a comfortable living. Next, please. The Armenian question. In April 1909, approximately 30,000 Armenians were killed during a wave of Turkic nationalism and religious fervor in and around Adana in southwestern Anatolia. Diana was appalled and horrified by the news, motivating her to focus her energy toward Armenia and its people. Adana became a turning point in her life. Her numerous subsequent writings almost exclusively addressed the Armenian question, namely, what protections and freedoms would be afforded the Armenians as subjects of the declining Ottoman Empire? Next, please. The business was doing well, and Michael, at 18, was able to take on the lion's share of the operation. And so Diana wanted to do whatever she could about the events transpiring half a world away. She began networking, attending lectures, and holding regular salon gatherings in her home with the leaders of Yokohama foreign community and visiting dignitaries. 100 years before the emergence of social media, Diana created an extensive network of connections which would continue to grow over the following decade. Next, please. Diana wrote books at a feverish pace. In 1910, she published 2 works, The Truth About the Armenian Massacres and Betrayed Armenia. Next, please. Diana's commitment to the Armenian cause far exceeded an intellectual or patriotic motivation to defend her countrymen. She was on a mission ordained by God. Next, please. Her 1911 publication, In His Name, describes her vision that defined her path. Next, please. Diana's calling emboldened her. She was determined to do whatever she could to draw attention to the plight of the Armenians. She wrote 3 more books, The Peace Problem, Peace No Peace, and The Great Evil. Next, please. Arguing for self-determination and an independent Armenia. She believed Armenians would thrive if allowed to govern themselves, but instead they were pawns in the game of imperialism. Next, please. From 1909 to 1914, Diana pushed herself beyond all reasonable expectations. She wrote and published 6 books, about 50 articles, and maintained extensive correspondence, writing to any and all who might listen. Every time she learned of someone interested in the cause, she would mail him one of her books with a letter apologizing for writing without proper introduction. No stone was to be left unturned. By 1914, exhausted and frustrated, seeing the start of World War I, and convinced of the imminent danger facing Armenians, Diana collapsed from a nervous breakdown, proclaiming that, quote, her faith had trembled. Next, please. Diana's efforts to prevent the atrocities in Anatolia were in vain. The Armenian Genocide of 1915 surpassed her worst predictions. 1.5 million people were killed, hundreds of thousands of survivors fled in all directions, including to the Caucasus. From there, some continued north to Russia, only to find that country embroiled in the bloody Bolshevik Revolution. Next, please. Genocide survivors could not go home. They could not go west to Europe into the heart of World War I, and so many chose an unexpected direction, east across Siberia, all the way to the Pacific Ocean, a 10,000-kilometer journey. As there were no ships to take them to America from the Russian port city of Vladivostok, refugees first needed to get to Japan. Next, please. Oh, and next, please. Okay. Dr. Meline Mesropyan will speak in detail about Japan's response to Armenian refugees, and specifically how Diana influenced that foreign policy. I will simply say that, next please, Diana's role was critical in assisting Armenian refugees transiting through Japan. The outcome for these refugees would have been completely different without her. Not having passports or proper travel documents, the refugees would not have reached Japan and would have remained in Vladivostok or Harbin. Next, please. Not accomplishing their ultimate goal of reaching the United States. In addition to coordinating the refugees' entry into Japan, Diana also coordinated their exit. She searched for sponsors and relatives in the United States. She wrote to the US Secretary of State, Robert Lansing, begging that the refugees might be provided entry into the US. Once they did obtain approval, Diana arranged their travel from Yokohama to San Francisco or Seattle primarily. Next, please. This all took several months, during which time, using her own resources, Diana rented housing and hotel rooms in Yokohama to shelter the refugees. She found them jobs and enrolled their children in school. I'll make one comment about this photo. It's actually my grandfather in the standing in the back and with his two children, my mother and uncle, and the woman sitting in the chair is a refugee. Unfortunately, I don't know her name, but she was hired by Diana to be a nanny to the children. Next, please. Between 1917 and 1919, the American Red Cross ran camps in Russia to aid the millions of refugees fleeing World War I. The largest of these camps was in Vladivostok. Next in size was in Harbin, Manchuria. Diana became the Japanese representative for the Armenians at the American Red Cross camps. Waves of 60 to 70 Armenian refugees would come to Yokohama at a time as the scope of Diana's work expanded. Next, please. One of her biggest struggles was gaining ship passage, as steamship companies were booked beyond capacity for months ahead, given that many vessels had been reassigned to serve in the war. For years prior to the establishment of the First Republic of Armenia and for years after its dissolution, Diana truly was acting as the de facto ambassador of the lost nation of Armenia, single-handedly aiding her countrymen. Next, please. And next, please. An epilogue at the end of my film states that Diana aided 600 refugees, which I calculated by reviewing ship manifests and immigration documents of Armenian refugees traveling from Yokohama to San Francisco and Seattle. However, based on new information, that number should be adjusted to an estimated 4,000. Next, please. Appointment as Honorary Consul. On July 22nd, 1920, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Hamo Ohanjanyan, wrote to Diana, appointing her as Honorary Consul of Armenia in Japan, quote, for defending the interests of the newly born fatherland and mitigating the conditions of our compatriots, end quote. Next, please. She accepted the position, but before Japan could recognize her new status, the First Republic of Armenia collapsed and was absorbed by the Soviet Union. Diana's appointment as Honorary Consul lasted only a few months, yet this is how she is remembered. The truth is that Diana Apcar committed a majority of her life to defending and protecting her country and her people. Next, please. In conclusion, on September 1st, 1923, the Great Kanto earthquake claimed over 100,000 lives in Japan. Diana's house collapsed with her inside, but she survived with barely a scratch. For the remainder of the decade, she continued to work with refugees and the underprivileged until she was unable due to health and age. Next, please. In 1929, her oldest daughter, Rose, with her husband and 3 children, moved to San Francisco. Diana remained in Yokohama with her son, Michael, and his family, as well as her youngest daughter, Ruth. Diana died on July 8th, 1937, at the age of 77. She is buried in Yokohama. Next, please. If you would like more information about Diana, please go to my website, dianaapcar.org. That's DIANAAPCAR.org. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mimi. What a remarkable life, Diana Apcar. And now we're turning to Dr. Meline Mesropyan, who was born and raised in Yerevan, Armenia, and initially earned her bachelor degree in Japanese linguistics. She's a fellow researcher at Tohoku University's Graduate School of International Culture in Sendai and a lecturer at Hyogo University in Kobe, Japan. She has spent the last 8 years researching the life and work of Diana Apcar. Her Ph.D. dissertation, written in Japanese and making extensive use of Japanese archival data, dealt with the Japanese government's processing of Armenian refugees during World War I and Diana Apcar's role in this. One of Meline's ongoing projects involves turning her dissertation into a book on the life and work of Diana Apcar. Meline Can.
Thank you, Melissa Jan. Thank you very much. I am so excited to be here today. Thank you for having me, and thank you for organizing this amazing event. And Mimi Jan, thank you for amazing introduction to Diana. And I want to greet all the people that are here, the attendees that found that, you found time to attend this event. And I'm very happy to see some names among them that are descendants of some of the refugees that were in Japan. Thank you very much for joining this webinar. So I was actually thinking about the content of today's talk, and because there is so much to talk about Diana, really, what about everything, what she did for her country and people. And eventually I've decided to talk about the treatment of Armenian refugees in Japan and her enormous role in this. So allow me to share my slides. All right. Okay. So this is the content of my presentation today. So after doing archival work and discovering Japanese diplomatic correspondences between Armenian refugees, correspondences about Armenian refugees and letters exchanged between Diana and the Japanese internal and foreign ministries, it became very clear to me that not only these refugees' lives would have been extremely difficult without Diana's support, but it would have been impossible for many, if not all of them, to actually enter Japan. So let me explain why and how all this happened. And if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to ask at the end. So let me just very quickly explain all these pictures. I mean, some of you may have already recognized their ancestors. And especially the one in the fairly middle part, Artashes and Satenik. So this picture caption actually on Project Save Armenian Photograph Archives website says Tokyo, Japan, 1918. But I want to draw your attention to that it actually couldn't have been 1918 because they left Japan in 1917. So it should be, I think it should be corrected. And I think they took this picture not in Tokyo but in Yokohama. I am not quite sure about this, but there might have been some refugees that went to Tokyo to see the capital, but some investigation still needed to be done about this. But anyway, I just wanted to tell you about that. And Garabet Keshkekian, who is in kimono here, he actually, the origin of this picture is not known, so we don't know whether it was taken in Japan or in America. According to his daughter, it may have been taken in the US, but I actually doubt that. So I think it was taken in Yokohama, but I still have to investigate about that too. And Philippos Balikian, whose I think whose ancestors are here right now. Thank you for joining us. And this photo was taken in Yokohama in 1919. I can assure that because there was a writing behind the picture. All right. So, sorry. Just a moment. So given Armenia's geographical location at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, as well as historical circumstances, Armenian history has often been defined by migration, border crossing, transnational interaction, and international trade. And Japan, however distantly located, has also become a destination for Armenian travelers, traders, and even refugees who arrived in Japan after the major restoration. And one of those raiders was, as Mimi already mentioned, Michael Apkar. Of course, he was not directly from Armenia, which was far from Japan. He was from, he came to Japan from Calcutta, but still he was Armenian. And many Armenian refugees during the Armenian Genocide also came to Japan. So between 1915 and 1930, a period of time that spanned both World War I and the Armenian Genocide, the refugees fled to Japan through Vladivostok and Harbin, then to Japan, and then to America and Europe, apparently. And some of them were also repatriated. So I will explain now. Let me quickly explain this map to you, because this map is actually not, it's incomplete. I have made this map. So you can see four colors, routes showing 4 refugees who left their home country in the Ottoman Armenia. And just sorry, here you can see this dark dots. Those are the home countries of those refugees who left their homes. And so up until to Samara, their routes were different, you can see. And from Samara to until I think this was Tomsk, if I'm not mistaken, they took the Siberian Railway. You can see it's in black because they all took this route. And then from here, some went to Harbin. Maybe many of them went to Harbin, actually. And then from Harbin, they went to Vladivostok. Sorry, Harbin is here. Sorry, so these refugees went directly to Vladivostok, but some of them went to Harbin and then to Vladivostok. And from Vladivostok must be here. Sorry, the arrow is wrong. I'm really sorry. Vladivostok is here. And then from Vladivostok, they went to Tsuruga. Tsuruga is here. That was the port, the entrance port to Japan, close to Vladivostok. And then from Vladivostok, they went to Yokohama, and Kobe is here. Sorry, my arrow's a little bit messed up here. I don't know what happened there. So yeah, and so this, just a moment. Yeah, so this route is actually incomplete, and so you can see some dots here. These were those Armenians who were repatriated from Yokohama. They took ship to Port Said. They went all the way to Port Said here, and then went back to Kilikia. And some of them from there, even from Port Said, went to Lebanon, to Egypt, Cairo, etc. So most of them didn't have travel documents, sufficient finances to support themselves, and most importantly, an official body, such as an embassy or a consulate that could take care of them arriving at a certain destination, which in this case was Japan. And during that time, Japan became a crossroad, not only for Armenian refugees, but for refugees from all around the world, including Europeans, Jews, Arabs, Russians, etc. So in today's talk, I'm going to answer the following questions. What was the international status of refugees at the start of the 20th century? Did Japan have any specific regulations or policies to deal with the refugees at that time? How were refugees dealt with the Japanese government? What kind of problems did the Armenian refugees face before and after their arrival to Japan? And how were those problems solved? Finally, I will estimate how many Armenian refugees passed through Japan, which is a very rough estimation. And of course, Diana's role in all these. And so in order to understand the full picture of what Diana did, it is very important to understand this refugee, the whole situation at that time with the refugees. During World War I, the issue of refugee status was drawing the world's attention for the first time. The miserable conditions that refugees faced around the world remained officially unrecognized up until 1923. In 1921, about 1 million Russian refugees drew the attention of international society. As a result, the agency of the League of Nations High Commissioner for Refugees was formed in order to provide international legal protection for refugees. In the following year, an appointed commissioner for refugees, Fridtjof Nansen, created the so-called refugee passport, which is known as Nansen passport, firstly for Russian refugees to shield them from possible difficulties experienced during migration, employment, medical care, etc. And by 1924, Armenian refugees were also included in the international legal system as their situation was increasingly becoming critical. By 1923, 34 countries, including Japan, ratified the treaty and recognized the Nansen passport for Russian refugees. And by 1925, 23 countries, including Japan, recognized the Nansen passport for Armenian refugees. In 1926, during a meeting regarding Russian and Armenian refugees for modification of the system, the concept of refugee was defined for the very first time and applied to the refugees of Russian and Armenian origins. So you can see the definition of Russian and Armenian refugees. I won't read it for you. And interestingly enough, according to Bruno Cabanes, refugees who received Nansen passports were classified according to their birthplace, which means that Armenians who were born in the Russian Empire would be classified as Russian refugees, and the Armenians who were born in the Ottoman Empire would be classified as Armenian refugees. So now let us examine the situation in early 20th century Japan. With the expansion of worldwide railway networks in the beginning of the 19th century, the number of political refugees increased. But because no international pact was signed back then, political refugees were only recognized by treaties signed between individual countries and municipal extradition laws. Only 2 treaties regarding political refugees were signed with the US and Russia, with Japan, in which a principle was established according to which the extradition was disallowed. However, according to a Japanese doctor of law, Hiroshi Honma, aside from those 2 treaties, Japan didn't enact any municipal extradition law and didn't sign any treaty with any other countries. As previously discussed, before 1923, it's very important to understand this. Before 1923, refugees were not internationally recognized and didn't have any legal protection. Accordingly, they faced various challenges all around the world, and all of them were entirely dependent on humanitarian aid. So the situation the Armenian refugees were facing was that as refugees, they had no international recognition and they were en route to a destination, Japan, that had no refugee policy. Of course, their final destination was going to be the US, and Japan would be only a transit point for them. So here, I would like to talk about the Japanese treatment of the Armenian refugees. I would like to example also the arrival of Armenian refugees to Japan and the Japanese government's treatment towards them and what kind of challenges they were facing. So this section is based on newly discovered Japanese diplomatic archival documents dated 1918, 1920, and from 1923 to 1925. From the content of one of Diana's letters to the American Red Cross, it is understood that Armenian refugees started coming to Japan from the end of 1915. According to an article of the ministerial ordinance that you can see on the screen, the ministerial ordinance of immigration issued in February 1918, the requirement for a foreigner, not a refugee, a foreigner, normal foreigner, entering Japan was carrying a passport with an issued Japanese visa. So as previously mentioned, the majority of the refugees didn't have money and travel documents to move to another country, irrespective of whether they were refugees or regular foreigners. They could not obtain visas or board any ships coming to Japan without passports. So where did the Armenian refugees obtain their passports? Could the refugees enter the country without having Japanese passports? How did they do it? Did the Japanese government consider those passports as valid documents and accept them? As is known, in 1918, so-called Russian Armenia declared its independence, which was recognized de facto by the powers, including Japan, only in 1920. This new Armenian Republic was issuing Armenian passports. But what about before 1918? Because on manifests, there are people whose nationalities are Armenians. I will talk about it later. After World War I broke out and the Armenian Genocide started, in various Armenian communities around the world, so-called Armenian committees were formed in order to ameliorate the situation of Armenian refugees who had spread all around the world. One of the many services they provided were identification documents, passbooks, to be used as passports. But I haven't been actually able to find one of those passbooks issued by the committees. After 1918, the Armenian diplomatic representatives, along with the Armenian committees, started issuing passports. Besides these two kinds of identification documents, many refugees also obtained protection certificates. The executive committee of, and passports issuing by French, British, and Russian consulates. The executive committee of Primorsky Krai, the capital city is Vladivostok of Primorsky Krai, and the Chinese government and other governmental offices on their way to Japan. And actually, you can see that this is a Japanese visa stamp, which was issued by Giro Kikuchi. You will see his picture later. So judging from the ship manifests of the ships taking Armenian refugees from Japan to the US, it became clear that the majority of the Armenian citizenships were registered as Armenians. Of course, we cannot be sure whether this is 100% accurate, which presumably was based on the Armenian passports they carried. But it is not clear how many of them were issued by the committees. Here we can see the refugees could procure ID documents for traveling. So here the graph shows that 65% of these Armenian refugees, and you can see I calculated only 483 Armenians were carrying Armenian passports, presumably. So according to the ministerial ordinance that you saw earlier about foreign immigration, those who were feeble-minded, mentally weak, poor, and others who might need help were not allowed to enter the country. And according to Diana's letter to the Interior Minister of Japan, Rentaro Mizuno, in April 1918, a group of Armenian refugees arrived in Tsuruga and were trying to enter the country without having Japanese visas. They were not only barred from entry at the port, but were also called Turks and considered as enemies. According to the correspondence between the Japanese Consul General at Vladivostok, Yuro Kikuchi, and the Foreign Ministry, it is clear that none of the refugees had ever been to the consulate in Vladivostok to obtain visa by that point. Why would they possibly think they didn't need Japanese visa? Maybe they didn't think at all, but there was one interesting newspaper article I found that I thought that could have been the reason. And that showed that one of the reasons could be the Armenian committee passports that I've just mentioned that they might have received. According to the Armenian newspaper Araj, the Armenian committee in Vladivostok was issuing passports for refugees in 3 languages: Armenian, Russian, French. It was recognized, according to that article, it was recognized by China, Ceylon, Russia, Egypt, and Japan. And there were others also mentioned. So they might have thought that the passport might have been enough to enter the country, as it was also recognized by Japan. But that wasn't the case. That wasn't true. Japan didn't recognize those passports. But of course, we cannot be sure whether they really thought like that or not. So in addition to not having visas, the refugees also didn't have money. Thus, in spite of being taken for enemy Turks because of their birthplace and not fulfilling the country's legal conditions for entry, how did the refugees who reached Tsuruga in 1918 manage to enter Japan? So in order to help the refugees in Tsuruga, in any ways, I don't know how, Diana was informed about this. So in order to help the refugees in Tsuruga to overcome the above mentioned legal hurdles, Diana started communicating with the Ministry of the Interior, patiently explained that the refugee situation, the refugee situation, and assured the Japanese government, that they did not intend to stand in Japan. So requested that the government accept the refugees into the country, not as Armenians born in the Ottoman Empire, but as Armenians born in Armenia. By the way, this is the letter written, that you can see Diana's name in here. So it was written in Japanese, but we know that Diana's knowledge of Japanese was not to that level that she could have written this email. Apparently, not email, this letter. So apparently she wrote this letter in English and someone translated it for her. After her request, the decision was made by the Japanese government to consider the refugees as poor people that don't fall under the restrictions of the ordinance, and that the refugees would be granted special entry permission on certain conditions. They had to submit applications to the ministry with their nationality, name, place of birth, destination, and in addition that the Armenian Committee of America would take care of the expenses, accommodation, transportation, and all other things the refugees might need. So I have to mention here that in 1915 or right after that, when the genocide started, Diana became a member, Mimi has also mentioned about this, a member of different committees, including the American Red Cross, and a representative in Japan. So she became an official person in Japan. And this, the previous letter that I showed, this letter, she signed her name, and we can see she signed as a member of a representative of the Armenian Committee in America. So Diana, as a member of the committee, was to take care of all their expenses. According to Diana's correspondence with the American Red Cross in Vladivostok, Diana had permission to take care of the refugees and was recognized as their guardian. Based on these correspondences, we can infer that the possibility that from that point, all the refugees who had problems with visas of maybe with identification documents could have been granted special entry permission under these conditions. So it should be noted here that later on in 1920s, Diana had to submit the so-called guarantee papers, where she assured the government that she was going to take care of all the refugees' needs and that she was responsible for their actions. This is one example of probably many other guarantee papers that she processed, thanks to which the refugee could obtain special entry permission. So here we can see that some refugees could enter Japan without visas under special conditions made by the government, thanks to the intervention of Diana Apcar. Thus, it can be stated that despite the fact that Japan didn't have a refugee policy and had strict regulations, the government compromised and lent a hand to the Armenian refugees, and that Diana's role was huge. Without her, it would have been impossible. So from the correspondence between Consul Kikuchi and Foreign Minister, it became clear that Japan, following England's actions, didn't want to recognize Armenian passports, committee passports, and issue visas. 3 days after this, Diana was informed about the rejection of the Armenian committee passports at the Japanese consulate and sent 3 letters after another to the foreign minister, reminding him that Japan was one of the countries that recognized the Armenian Republic, and that the Armenian committees had been authorized by the Republic to issue passports to Armenians. After conducting some investigation regarding other countries' recognition of the Armenian committee passports, in July 1920, the foreign minister, Uchida, sent an order that Consul General Kikuchi should provide travel certificates instead of visas that would allow the Armenians who had Armenian passports to enter Japan. Whether this kind of correspondence concerning the Armenian passports continued or not, we don't know. But Armenian passport, we don't know, as I have already mentioned, the majority of the Armenians carried Armenian passports, and the fact was that they could now enter the country. It can only be assumed that they obtained travel certificates given by the Japanese consul Kikuchi if they were at the Japanese consulate in Vladivostok. So now let me quickly estimate this is the letter talking about the special certificates instead of visas. About the number, which is my current research is about finding out the actual number of the Armenian refugees who came to Japan, which is quite challenging. An Armenian researcher, Artvi Bakhchinian, refers to an Armenian source of information that suggests that Diana helped 3,000 Armenian refugees in total. However, no details are provided. The Japanese author, Oyama Mitsuyo, mentions that the amount of the Armenian refugees in Japan, based on 1919 Japanese statistical data, showing the departure and arrival of foreigners through Tsuruga. The table you can see in the Japanese document is provided according to various nationalities. However, there is a question of how the Armenians' nationalities was decided here. So was it decided according to their race, which was sometimes a customary classification of that time, or according to their official travel or birth certificates? it is possible that other Armenians who had documents issued by Russia, Persia, or Britain, France could have been categorized as non-Armenians. So this requires further investigation. In the course of my doctoral studies, it became clear that the Armenian refugees departed not only to the USA from Japan, but also to Europe and possibly Canada and Australia. And I actually found some refugees who went to Hawaii. Furthermore, some of them were repatriated through Port Said in 1919. So some the descendants that are present now may be able to find their ancestors' name in this list. So it was possible to find a certain number of repatriated refugees in the 1919 correspondence between Diana and the American Red Cross. The correspondence revealed a total number of 61 repatriated refugees, but there were also names that were not in this list of repatriated refugees. So I estimated less than 100, this is very rough, less than 100 of refugees were repatriated from Japan to Port Said. Concerning the refugees who departed to the US, according to the passenger list that I have mentioned earlier, so Mimi mentioned 600, but I was going through some names and I could find some people who were not refugees because I knew that they were not, based on some documents that I have found. So I think that there were in total there were 502. Let's make it 2 because recently I have added one more. The only confirmed destination of Armenians leaving Japan are Seattle, San Francisco, and Port Said. There are reports of Armenians leaving for Europe, but this hasn't been confirmed by any correspondence or passenger lists. Regardless, there were a large number of ports all around the world that were accessible from Japan, such as Vancouver, Australia, Hong Kong, and many others, including Europe. This needs more investigation. So finally, there is the question of refugees whose arrivals were recorded in Japan, but not their departures. So we can see in 1919, there were 284 people departed, but there were 392 who arrived in 1920. So these numbers are not matching. So the remaining 300 and here we can see that only 16 departed in 1921, and the remaining 389 refugees could have departed from Japan at any time after their arrival. However, it is doubtful that they stayed until 1930. So even this was the case. Even if this was the case, if we subtract the number of refugees who departed to the US from 1920 to 1930, that still leaves 219 refugees that might have departed to somewhere else than San Francisco or Seattle. So furthermore, considering that the number of refugees who departed to Seattle, San Francisco, and Port Said was 563, the number of unaccounted for refugees that departed to other possible destinations from Japan, such as port cities in the US, France, and Australia, could possibly have reached 1,000 to 1,500. So this is, however, very rough approximation that requires more careful and detailed examination. To conclude, to summarize the presentation, it can be said that in the beginning of the 20th century, Armenian refugees without internationally recognized status came to Japan. Additionally, Japan at that time did not have any policy regarding refugees. It is very hard to comprehend the Japanese government's treatment of refugees before 1918. However, after 1918, it can be stated that Japan's shift in policy towards accepting the Armenian refugees was hugely influenced by Diana Apcar. Consequently, due to Diana's efforts and the Japanese government's compassionate approach, probably about 1,000 to 1,500 or more Armenian refugees could safely pass through Japan and go to their final destination. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Meline. Wow, I've learned a lot. And your talk's relevance to today is disturbing and also moves us to look back to history, to devise better tools to fight against wars that displace people from their homes and force them to become refugees in countries where they have to face all kinds of material hardships, and on top of that, xenophobia and all the problems with the labels and documents and being undocumented, documented, that these displaced people were defined, categorized, and their survival is actually depending on these definitions. So I have a question here by Shake Ajamian. Is there any way that you can share the slide with the names, please? So if you can go back to that slide with the names that she would love to see if she can find him. I actually have a question related to this question. I wanted you to tell, if you can, a little more about the refugee stories beyond numbers. For example, we know that one of these refugees survivors was artist Berjui Kailian. So what do we know about that? And it deeply moves me, gives me goosebumps that some of the descendants are with us tonight. So if you can talk a little bit about that. You are muted, Meline.
My apologies. Okay, so let me share what I have read so far. And Mimi, if you have any stories, please share. I am still trying to find more descendants, more memoirs, and more stories, because I'm planning to write an article about these refugees, about their experiences in Japan while they were in Japan, about their connection with Diana, their thoughts about Diana, and everything. So I'm still investigating, and one of the fascinating stories and very funny and interesting stories that I love is about those Dermagrdician's family that you saw in my second slide. There were pictures. So the picture with an old man sitting in the middle, and an old lady and the children. So that Melkeset Dermagrdician and Ripsime Dermagrdician. So they when they came to Japan, it is actually stated. This story is written in the memoir. It's called Anushavan. So in this memoir, they talk about Ripsime's experience in the Japanese bath, because Japanese baths are very different from from all around the world. So it's and at that time, actually, there was a male worker in a female bath who would help women to scratch their back, help them to wash themselves. So, of course, Ripsime, can you imagine an Armenian woman, very conservative and very, you can imagine an Armenian woman being in a bath, taking a bath, and seeing a man entering the bath. So she screamed extremely loudly, and so it was a huge cultural shock that she had at that time. There was that when I read the story, it made me smile, it made me laugh, but it was a shock for her. So I am looking for more of these kind of stories. And of course, my focus is on Japan, how they experienced Japan, because Japan was like an alien world for them. It was unknown. Everything was different in Japan, the culture, the language, the people. So everything was very interesting for them. And one of the refugees, I am really sorry, I don't remember the name, but when he saw the people driving rickshaws, any of those who don't know what rickshaws are, those are men rided cars on wheels, so man instead of horses. So this refugee was very surprised and was looking at it like, what is this? Why are they using people instead of horses? What kind of culture is that? Very he saw it as something that he couldn't really understand, So there are very interesting stories. I cannot remember in details right now. When I remember, I will tell you. So Mimi, if you have any stories, please share, if you know any.
There is one I remember from my mother. There was a man who got a job selling nail polish, and he would decorate his daughter with a different color on each nail. And then the two of them would go around and she would display the nail polish on her fingernails that he was trying to sell. I mean, just little things like that. Yeah.
Yes, they make all their experiences very interesting for the readers to read. And please, so those who are listening to us, if you know anyone whose ancestors were in Japan, please stay in touch and please contact me or Mimi. I am looking for more memoirs and more stories of the refugees who were in Japan.
I think if they wish to contact you, they could contact us at the Promise Armenian Institute. We can send forward emails to you and or to Mimi, and you could even send them this slide. So you can stop sharing. I think our viewer was able to find her relative here, which is wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you.
So this is great. So I have just a couple of small questions myself. For Mimi, are Diana's books still in print, the ones that you were showing images of? Are they available for purchase?
Actually, Amazon has, I'm not
How brilliant.
Anything published prior to 1923, there's no copyright restriction. And so you can order from Amazon and they just run it off and then send it to you. So I'm not quite sure, who's behind that or how, who's reaping the benefits, but whatever. They are. There was a manuscript that was not published. It's a series of short stories about the refugees. And my mother's cousin published that in 2004, I believe. It's called A Thousand Tales. What is it called?
1,000.
Book of a Thousand.
Yes, 1,000.
Book of a Thousand Tales, I believe. Yes.
Yes.
And so that's a little, those stories are, oh, thank you.
Yes.
Excellent. From the Book of 1,000 Tales. So that kind of describes the experiences or, tales that she would learn from refugees.
Mm-hmm. Very good.
In a short story, in a fictionalized format.
Fantastic.
And I've tried to find
available. Yeah, no, go ahead.
Sorry. Yes, I have tried to find Diana's books in Japanese archives, libraries, and I think there is one in the National Library in Tokyo. I haven't seen it myself, but I think a Peace and No Peace, or the Peace Problem, I am not quite sure, but I think it is in one of the libraries.
Okay, very good. And speaking of archival materials, you've documented, Meline, a lot that you have found there in Japan. Are there any original archival materials in Armenia, in the current Republic of Armenia, that exist, or are they mainly in Japan?
They are mainly in Japan. There are in Armenia, but very, very few. Very few.
Okay.
Mainly in Japan.
Okay, thank you.
I have a follow-up question. Meline is working using memoirs as primary sources. I want to ask a related question to Mimi. As someone who has been working on intergenerational transmission of memory within Armenian families, especially women's stories, I'm fascinated by your own story of finding your great-grandmother's archive. And also, as someone who has been researching 19th to 20th century Armenian women's intellectual and political history, I know that many precious archival material is preserved in family archives. That's a very Armenian thing. So my question is twofold. What did you know about Diana before finding the archive? What kind of stories of hers were transmitted to you within the family space? And how, if transmitted, how did these stories help you interpret what you found in the archives and the printed materials?
So what's passed down through family lore or storytelling, I've decided is questionable as far as, it's just it's not very factually based. It's good for storytelling, but when, for example, I asked my uncle, who was her oldest grandchild, he was born in 1913. So, and then they left in 29. So he was, a teenager when they came to the United States. And I asked him, well, how many people do you think Diana helped? And he said, well, maybe 50. And so the scale of what she was doing and the number of people that came through Japan, he really had no idea of volume of the work involved. And it's quite simply, he was a child and, he had limited exposure to it. Additionally, Diana didn't talk about what she did. Nobody, she was a very, just full of humility, and she was very religious, very prayerful, but her accomplishments, her deeds were not being recognized or praised or advertised in any way. So there really wasn't that much information. And and in the book, in the box of materials, they were primarily her publications or the unpublished manuscript. There wasn't any detail of her actual work, and part of that was probably due to the earthquake in 1923. I'm sure she kept records. I would think, just, I feel like I know her just from doing all of this research, and I'm sure she would have kept documents. She would have kept records, but I expect that all of that was destroyed in the earthquake. And so, we are dependent on archives. Stanford University was good because there was an extensive correspondence with the president of Stanford. So there was that archive. And then the American Red Cross archive was also at Stanford. And so it's from these other, or a descendant of a refugee has a memoir. It's very much a piecing together a puzzle. Nothing is in one location and nothing is comprehensive. So we keep kind of adjusting things as something is discovered. But I will say that, when I started, and it's probably the same for you, Meline, you're extracting little bits of this and that, and you have this idea that it's really much bigger than you're actually seeing. And then you see the proof of that. And then you see the proof of that again. So it's been very, very rewarding, I will say.
And I have to add that this is a very, very common thing for Armenian women's history, that we have. So Diana Apcar was not only a humanitarian activist, but she was a writer. And it's really embarrassing not to know and have learned about her. She's not only a writer, she is also one of to situate, and that's why what Melina's work is extremely important, because she situates her in global history because she was also writing about peace, about refuge. So the global history of peace activism, global history of refugees. So it's like beyond Armenian history, and that's why this is extremely important. But it's also very common. I know. Because most of the women writers and activists that I write on, it's very common that their families don't know what they accomplished. Or like we were talking, my students in Armenia are writing a children's book, and Diana Apcar is, yes, they worked with you, and we're grateful for that. Most of the women that they featured in the book, when they contacted their families, their grandchildren didn't have an idea about who this woman was. One of them was a freedom fighter. Later years in her, like, she was a grandmother, and they couldn't even, compare the photographs of her, being a freedom fighter and being a grandmother and growing cucumbers in Fresno, really. So, which is not a conflicting, contrasting image. That's part of life. But how much they decided not to share with their families. So that's also a part of Armenian gender history, basically. And this is fascinating, that this is actually the third and fourth generation. We are going back and digging the archives and bringing them into, like, unearthing their stories. That I'm really, you said that the things that you were passed on are not factually correct necessarily, but I'm very much interested in the stories, the storying, because it tells a lot about Armenian womanhood. what was chosen to be transmitted and what kind of an image of a grandmother they created out of her. Fascinating, really. Thank you very
I'd
much.
like to add two things about this. So Diana did not only talk about her accomplishments in the family, but she also didn't show that she was having, I think you understood from my presentation and also from what Mimi told you, that Diana was going through very hard time with the refugees. She herself was facing many difficulties, especially financial, because she was, so what I wanted to say that some memoirs say that Diana was rich, but Diana wasn't rich. So this is very important point, because she didn't want to show the refugees that she needed money herself to support them. So the refugees didn't know what she was going through, which was very fascinating for me. So she thought that she wasn't important, not as that she wasn't important, but the most important thing is to save these refugees. The refugees are the most important thing. So whatever is the problem, I can solve it. And it's not that, you know what I mean. So it was, I think it's an amazing point that I mean, she was just very humble, and I mean, yeah. And other thing that I wanted to add about the archives, I am very sure that there are archives in Europe as well that have documents about Diana, which hasn't been found yet. In 2017, I think it was in 2017 that I found a European archive. Actually, that was the European. I forgot, but it was a European archive that I found many letters of Diana corresponding with Europeans and.
In The Hague? Was that in The Hague?
Not Hague, not Hague. The other one that you also, Mimi, helped me to get.
In Geneva. That was
Geneva. Yes, UN archive. The UN archive. Sorry, yes, the United Nations archive. Yeah, and there are documents. I know where they are in The Hague. So, but unfortunately, this is not time for us to travel freely and go to archives now. But I am hoping and I am planning that one day I can travel to Europe and find some more documents about Diana. And there are, and I am actually planning to go to Tokyo again for archival work. And I'm hoping I can find more documents about the refugees and Diana in diplomatic archives of Japan. So there are still many other libraries in Japan that have many Diana's articles that haven't been found yet. And I have managed to find 100 articles so far. And I am planning in the future, I am planning to publish a book only about her articles, just her articles, a book of her articles. And I am 100% sure that there are another 100 articles to be found in Japanese libraries. And I am planning to do that. So in the near future, hopefully.
Wonderful. Thank you. Melissa, did you have any other questions you'd like to pose to either Meline or Mimi?
Millions of questions, but they can all wait.
Oh, okay. Very good. Okay, well, thank you. I think we're just about at the end of our time today. So thank you once again very much to Dr. Meline Mesropyan and Mimi Malayan for a very stimulating pair of talks on this fascinating film about Diana Apcar and about her life and her extraordinary contributions to Armenians and to Armenian genocide survivors. We are grateful to both of you for taking the time to discuss your very important work and studies. So many of us were really touched personally by watching the film and then by hearing the names that you have talked about. One of our viewers found a relative's name just as she was watching this, and others of us have found names of Khanamis, as I was telling you before our discussion. So it's very, very impressive. So I offer my thanks to you both, to Dr. Melissa Bilal for organizing this. And let me also offer our special thanks to our very energetic Promise Armenian Institute Deputy Director, Hasmik Bagdasaryan, who has been very active in all aspects of this event, behind the scenes and in front of the scenes. So thank you, Hasmik. And let me remind our audience that if you wish to view the film once again, it is still available for free viewing through Wednesday, tomorrow, March 9, at 11:59 p.m. Pacific time. So please check our Promise Armenian Institute website for the Vimeo link, and you'll be able to watch this Stateless Diplomat very easily. And so now let me close our webinar by announcing that we have a number of upcoming Zoom or YouTube-based events that are hosted or co-sponsored by the UCLA Promise Armenian Institute, 4 of which are planned for the month of April. At least 4, I guess I should say. On Monday, April 18, Dr. Robert Sukiasian, our Promise Armenian Institute Fulbright Scholar from Armenia, will present a lecture entitled The End of Armenian Sivas, the Extermination of Deportees. And this pertains to his fascinating research on mapping the deportation routes of Armenians from Sivas or Sepastia province during the Armenian Genocide. On Wednesday, April 20 and Thursday, April 21, the UCLA Library will host a 2-session webinar on Armenian women in focus, a celebration of their success. On Friday, April 22, author and San Francisco State Emerita faculty member Carol Bertram will give a talk on her fascinating new book, A House in the Homeland, which is an examination of Armenians' pilgrimages to places of ancestral memory. And as she notes, an intimate reclaiming of the towns, villages, neighborhoods, and houses of Ottoman Armenia. And finally, on April 26, 2022, Dr. Tallin Susiyan will provide a lecture on unearthing, discovering, unlearning Armenian indigeneity in Turkey. And this lecture is our second event that will be collaboratively presented with the UCLA undergraduate cluster course series on political violence in the modern world. So for information on these and other upcoming events, please visit our UCLA Promise Armenian Institute website or visit us on social media to see more details on this event or to sign up for our listserv. So once again, thank you to all of you for your attendance at this event, and we look forward to having you participate in future events for the Promise Armenian Institute at UCLA.